Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the OMNIA Performance Podcast. I'm Fergus Crawley. The man with the hand over his face is...
I'm Jonny P.
And to my left, to your right on screen is Dr. Phil, still without moustache, if you were here for the intro of the last episode. So, Phil...
I didn't shave in the break.
No, in the 6 minutes since we finished the last episode, Phil has not grown a moustache.
I've grown a moustache in about 10 minutes.
Anyway.
Soft.
Yeah, it's soft.
I have, and I've shaved it. And I've got 5 o'clock shadow. Yeah.
It's 25.
Think about that.
Oh, no.
Carry on.
Yes, okay. Anyway, we are wasting time.
Talking about my manliness here.
There's nothing to talk about.
In of itself.
Anyway, housekeeping. Do the stuff, like, follow, share, etc. Cheers. Thank you, Jonny.
It's gotten shorter and shorter.
Yeah, it
hasn't it? It used to be a very clear run.
But
at
people
that.
are doing
Now
it. We trust them. We
go
trust
here,
them.
Go there, go there. If we just
trust
point
them,
our
don't
fingers
we?
around, then we can just have a kind of a flash up of these things you're supposed to do.
Don't let us down. I'm hoping the camera will shift to me pointing.
I think you need to point at that one.
Oh, it's come back.
You ruined it for everyone. For those of you listening and not watching, we're very sorry, but maybe at this point you should go and watch. Nonetheless, we finished last episode by discussing the key difference from a research perspective between concurrent and hybrid training. What we're going to do in today's episode is actually break down that difference, the nuance, and why it's important to consider that, and then explore where the research on hybrid training specifically currently is, where we maybe have some insights from an anecdotal perspective, and then more openly what the broader considerations are moving forwards for us as coaches, as athletes, as professors, I guess, researchers,
Hopefully one day.
athletes, all of the above. All of the above.
Doctors.
Doctors without mustaches. I've tried to Sean Connery and just lost it. Doctors without mustaches.
Mustaches.
Anyway, Phil, why don't you break down, as you did at the end of last episode, what the key difference is from a research perspective in terms of concurrent training and hybrid training as you see it?
Cool. Yeah. So in the last episode, I tried to break down the differences between what a concurrent training is and then what I believe hybrid training is as well. So concurrent training is, you're training two different things concurrently. So usually that can be, for example, if you're a rugby player, you need to be strong. You also need to be very cardiovascularly fit as well. So you'd probably train both to try and get good at both, so that then in turn improves your sporting performance. You'd also have concurrent training as someone that might be doing some weight training to improve their running performance. So say you've got like a runner, they're doing some strength training to try and improve their running economy, so it improves their running performance. So the strength training is just supplementing their endurance work. Whereas hybrid training, I think, is different, and hybrid training falls within the umbrella of concurrent training, but I think it's a separate entity. Whereas, yes, you are training in two separate sports, technically. Like you might want to improve in powerlifting, but at the same time want to improve your triathlon performance. But you are actively trying to improve in these sports. You're not doing strength training to improve your triathlon performance. You're trying to get better at triathlon and get better at strength at your powerlifting. Yeah. So that's a completely different. Whether you do that at the same time, whether you do it at separate times of the year, it doesn't really matter, because the overall goal of hybrid training is to improve in both over time. So those are the difference for me.
I think I just want to flag as well, because it's something I get in YouTube a lot, and especially with triathletes, and this isn't from a critical point of view. Sometimes it can be, depending on how they word it. But there is a breakdown, I think, from those that don't necessarily enjoy strength training or don't enjoy triathlon training or running, to not be able to comprehend why somebody would do something else where it doesn't support the main sport. So, for example, triathletes will do nominal strength training to injury prevent and to keep them somewhat robust, but have no concept of why somebody might enjoy heavy squats, benching, and deadlift, because they might not have done that in the past. So from a purely societal and from something we've seen, we are in a space where we generally operate with people that enjoy doing strength training and are looking to develop themselves to do the first Ironman, their first Ultra, whatever it may be, because they enjoy both things. So I think a lot of the research thus far is reflective of that narrative, that there are sports that are looking to excel by adding certain elements supportive to that, whether that's strength training, whether that's CV training in the other direction. And that is reflected in some of the boxes that are appearing on Slow Twitch, for example, or YouTube comments, where triathletes especially can't seem to understand why I would lift heavily because it makes me a worse triathlete, but it's because I want to progress in both concurrently. I won't progress as fast as Gavin from down the road, who's purely training for an Ironman, and I won't progress as fast as Kev from up the road, who's purely training for a powerlifting competition, but I get to progress steadily in both and enjoy doing both things at the same time, hence hybrid training. So I think from an understanding point of view as well, the research might be somewhat reflective of the experience I've had with conversations where people just don't get it. They can't understand why I wouldn't want to be faster when I could be weaker and lighter, which is interesting to me because for example, I don't understand why people enjoy playing five-a-side 3 times a week.
Well, I mean, there you have it.
But I acknowledge that people do.
People are going to always come at this with a certain bias, and it's going to be their own, obviously. So you're going to have triathletes say, well, you could have done X triathlon a hell of a lot better if you weren't fanning about trying to do 500-pound squats. Well, yep. I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, no, cheers. Yeah.
But I want to do a 500-pound squat, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So there's the trick. And again, you take that's just people trying to excel in a way that interests them. And so we're kind of somewhat removing hybrid training can be removed essentially from traditional sports training in the sense that until we make it something, watch this space. There are no kind of hybrid games. So we've got no
copyright TM.
Quick, yeah. We need a little subtitle under there saying whatever it might say. So So generally you're going to come up against that bias quite a lot. The same as somebody would be quite happy to say the same kind of things. Well, you could have nailed that 500-pound squat if you weren't fucking about on a bike, couldn't you? Yeah. But you want to do both things. We want to work in these, as Alex has neatly described it before, Alex, we had it in these disparate sports, don't we? And mostly for people, that's because they want to be able to do all things. They want to be as strong as they can be without having to give up the ability to, in my case, I want to be able to lift the dinny stones and run over the mountains that they're placed underneath. It seems odd to me that somebody would say, well, I only want to lift the stones, I don't mind running shite. Like, well, why not do both? So yeah, the clarity there, thanks Phil, is pretty good actually. It is pretty clear because there is a nuanced difference, but a clear difference I think between hybrid and concurrent. Although, as you say, they're hybrids under that concurrent umbrella for obvious reasons, but they're slightly different, aren't they?
I think hybrid in America is often used to describe tactical athletes as well.
Yeah.
I guess
it's become a thing to describe any old thing, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit conflated, yeah.
So, add two things together, hybrid.
Yeah,
sounds cool.
Well, there are people with power building programs saying that they're doing a hybrid program because it's two things, which I guess is what hybrid, isn't it? It's two. Is that not, yeah. Anyway,
it's powerlifting with sets of 12.
Yeah. So there you go. So, but that's our definition. Surely, if we're going to look at literature, we're going to create research. We would define that at the very outset and say this is what we're calling this and why. And I think that's what we've done in basic terms there. We are in the game, if you like, of programming this, of creating programs so that people can actualize these goals and live through that. We're trying to facilitate people's end goal. And you're in a position where you're looking at how that pans out, how we can make that better through research, or sometimes, as discussed in the last episode, how things that we are seeing in practice might inform better research and therefore more clarity about what's actually happening. Where are we pushing this, do you think? What
in the literature?
In the literature, yeah.
Well, it's the term hybrid is not used in the literature at all.
No.
So you're taking your ideas from the concurrent training literature to help support your ideas around hybrid training, technically. And I guess that does make sense because based on the definition I gave earlier, hybrid training is a form. It could be seen in the umbrella of concurrent training. But a lot of the time, because they are intervention studies, and you've been working with Jonny for years now, and that's how you really see the benefits of the long-term approach of hybrid training. But I think the longest study I've read from an intervention study was 25 weeks total. So half a year, which is a long time. Most of the time it's like between 4 and 12.
Was that with one individual or a group of individuals?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Because I think that's an enormous nuance as well, is the adaptability of the individual in this space. Like the way we have some people respond to, my brother, for example, me and my brother are both very adaptive to new bands, but the way he responds to speed work is just insulting.
Well, I mean, you would
whereas you get people that can literally do 3 sets of 3 for 3 weeks in a row.
Having looked at some of Jamie's stats, I can concur it is insulting.
But it's the adaptability of the individual, whereby the 25 weeks, if you replicate that study with multiple individuals, I would hazard a guess that the results would be vastly different, where some would be significantly stronger and only slightly more efficient in zone 2, or only slightly faster over a mile, and vice versa. You might have people that haven't really improved much over strength, but their mile time has skyrocketed and vice versa. And I think there's genetic predispositions to that, but then it goes back to the previous podcast that we've done with Phil, which is how do we manipulate that genetic predisposition? How do you develop a relationship with a third party over time so that they can understand what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are? What do you take from the concurrent training literature to apply to that to determine what actually matters to this individual athlete? And therefore, how do you put together a sensible program to be able to make progress and perform an ongoing process of ultimately trial and error to determine where to go next? So it's kind of never ending, but there is not any real, there's nothing that's there's nothing that's replicated the anecdote from a literature sense, in the sense that Jonny would be able to list off all the anecdotal research he has on me over 5 years, which is interesting.
You're highlighting almost a limitation at the research. So what you described there was, okay, it was very athlete focused. Whereas in an intervention study, when you're comparing groups, like you're deliberately trying to control everything except for one variable, so you can understand the impact of that variable. So it doesn't matter how many people were in that 25-week intervention. Like, it has to be the same. Otherwise, we won't truly understand, if there is any change, where that change has come from. So that's where we have to infer a lot of what we see in the literature and make it's like a best estimated guess to try and see, well, how does that impact my situation that I'm looking at in front of me? Because there's never going to be anything in the literature that says, oh, this person's done exactly this, this is what you should do. It's going to be, these are the guidelines we're seeing over many studies, utilizing many participants. This makes sense based on these scientific findings we found, and that's why we take them away to help inform our programming. But if we went, the ideal approach is to be very individualistic with our programming, because we need to be, because everyone reacts different to different training stresses. It's difficult to truly give like a proper answer as to where's the hybrid research literature at the moment, because the concurrent training literature is giving us a lot of information, but not, I wouldn't say, at the hybrid level. Like, no one's doing interventions where they're training like lots and lots, like 11, 12 times per week or something like that. There's still a lot of questions that haven't really been answered.
Have they been asked, really, other than by yourself right now?
Not really.
No.
And that's because they're difficult. And they are really difficult to do.
From a practical point of view as well, is it you're obviously up against funding limitations and things, and because it's difficult, does that make it more difficult to even consider posing these questions, because it would be a harder sell as well?
Possibly. The hardest sell for hybrid training is that there's no governing body at the moment to provide support.
Well,
running,
at the beginning,
other sports, there's money in it.
If we had a hybrid games and there was
hybrid games,
that's right. There was something in it at the end, and you would say, okay, it's necessary to do this because you've got all these funders, you've got all these advertisers, you've got all these invested stakeholders and all the rest of it. At the moment, we're just saying we want to do it, so you'd have to. But I suppose that even using this hybrid format, because if you think about that first study that we discussed way back in episode 1 of your guest slots here, Phil, that was a hybrid study. Mm-hmm. That was powerlifting versus running, and then from there it's drawn conclusions about concurrent training, and then there's a huge amount of concurrent models out there, because obviously, as you've just said, they speak to sporting outcomes. So there's probably some scope, I would imagine, in using a very specific hybrid model to then inform a smaller differences in what might be concurrently, or what might be described as concurrent models. So if you're able to say, well, we know at this kind of vast end of these two spectrums, these are the conclusions we've drawn over X amount of studies that, as we know, haven't been done yet, we can then say, so within this, where that disparity is smaller, the possibility is that those effects are lesser, et cetera, et cetera. So there's probably some argument to say that talking about the funding potential and how you sell this to the university or whoever that we want to invest time and effort into doing this, that it might inform other things, I would guess.
Yeah, I think through the programming of hybrid training, it's developing a lot of questions that we can investigate, very specific programming questions that we can investigate, like the pre-fatigue stuff that we're doing, like how, or my ideas around developing the hot sessions. Like we need to know a little bit more around, okay, if we had 2 resistance training sessions, one was quite high intense and one was sort of like moderate, okay, what kind of responses are we going to get from that based on fatigue, based on the molecular responses? And then, you know, other things that are going to influence that. Okay, what's the training status of the athletes involved with that training study? And that's going to lead us to develop better conclusions to inform our programming, because we say, okay, we get a big response from the high intensity session, lesser response from that one. Okay, that means we can do other stuff with that session within our training week. We need to prioritize recovery around this one based on a training week. Here's athlete A who's got a big history in powerlifting, so they could probably handle these stresses better. Here's athlete B who's got a history in running, not so much in powerlifting. Their response to these 2 things are going to be completely different. Okay, based on all these questions, we might start to find exactly, or have confidence in our decisions. Because I think a lot of what we're doing, we kind of are confident what we're doing, but we don't have the scientific backup for every decision we make. Yeah. But by answering these questions, we then do have that scientific support for these decisions.
The model of approach that again, quite often comes back to combat sports, but it's an easy way to visualize this when we're trying to take this hybrid model, as you described, and the concurrent model and see if there's some kind of carryover, is that I think that within combat sports, the methodology, and clearly I would think this, I'm biased to my own way of thinking, and the methodology that I've spent sort of years trying to modify and get right. But I've applied that in this very much hybrid setting. So Fergus being a great example of it. Many others, but Fergus is the example that we're all looking at just now and can understand. And then I've taken it back to elite boxing. And so we're looking at a sport that then would have some merit in a scientific, you know, in the sense that there's much more vested interest in that. You know, people are saying, okay, there's money to be made here. So if I apply that in the same methodology in a combat sports scenario, the effects from my own experience, as in the athletes that I'm using it on, are better than when we didn't do that. So we then match intensity, we consolidate stressors, we look at different, so let's MMA, so we're using things like high intensity double legs and wrestling at the beginning of the week and keep that kind of stuff separated out from maybe skill sessions where flow or evasive maneuvers are useful, and then piece that together in a manner where that stress is consolidated enough in different pockets throughout the week. And we talked about it previously in terms of skill. So the high skill, high intense sessions are the priority sessions, of course, and they happen earlier in that microcycle. If we put that together within that kind of continuing microcycle, that continuing cycle of training, and find that the athlete recovers better, therefore adapts better, they're possibly making weight, they make weight that little bit easier, less stress there because all the other stress has been consolidated better, then the outcome there has been proven in a much more concurrent setting, if you like, by a hybrid model. So I think there's probably some merit in the research. And again, I'm clearly suggesting a bias based on the outcomes that I've seen, but I guess that's where you're going to approach things scientifically. You don't want to have that in place at all. You want to look at the body of data and say, okay, hypothetically, can we prove this hypothesis? But there's some possibilities there, I think.
I think, looking into other sports where they do forms of concurrent training, there's a lot we can learn from not only the practices from the coaches, but also the research to actually help inform hybrid training specifically as its own sport.
Well, we need the US government on board, because you can sell this as if you can develop superior tactical athletes through understanding this stuff better.
Well, I do think that's the other thing. We've discussed it many times, and again, Alex Viado, we keep mentioning him. If you don't know him, he'll feature on the podcast by the point you're listening to this one, and also coined the term hybrid. In actual fact, so both he and I, before we'd ever met each other, looked at this model of approach, or looked at the failings of kind of what I didn't call it hybrid training, I just called it training, but looked at the different models of approach. Why is this failing? And we were failing in ourselves trying to do things at these two disparate ends of the scale. And then looked at other and said, well, maybe it doesn't work, maybe the interference, et cetera, and kind of came up against the same brick wall that everybody else had. And then you've got to look at things like you've just mentioned, what are called tactical athletes or the military, special ops, whatever, over in America, here in Britain, and say, well, these guys are doing very, very disparate things. They have to perform high strength output, and after a long insertion, or have to be ready to go with a huge big pack on their back for 100 miles, and then actually sort of go into very close quarter combat. If that is something that people are able to do, of course, there's been a long exposure time to that amount of training. Can we look at these disparate ends of this scale? Can we look at hybrid training and hybrid research, and then say this can be applied to the training of very specific, very detailed individuals, as long as we use those parameters that we're now finding out more about, and use that consolidation again. Again, from an anecdotal perspective, we know we're producing athletes that are aspirants for special forces, and so far the success rate of those athletes across my involvement with CHP and in OMNIA and the evolution of OMNIA from where it was before, which was painless performance, over a 95% success rate. Now, that's a boast, and it's one that we would and probably should put up on the website. But the reason for it
feels a bit of a grey area, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Give me their details. Where do they live?
One that we can suggest is down to that management of stressors, down to that kind of management of the methodology or of those different disparate elements within a program. But I would love to see that then borne out in the science and actually see, because I can see, okay, it has this effect. I'm very interested to know what the whys and wherefores. In fact, I know how it works, but it's a little bit like being great at driving a car or something. And you're like, yeah, but I'd really like to understand, what's happening at a deeper level under the bonnet here. Yeah.
You just summarised people that drive nice, pleasant German whips versus those people that drive souped-up, mad, modded Ford Fiestas.
In my mind,
you're in the German whip,
in my mind,
and he's in the Ford Fiesta. Sorry, Phil.
Nissan
crackle,
Micra.
Crackle, pop.
Tesco car park.
Going faster than my whip.
What's this
Why
about?
is this?
What's it? But he gets stopped by the police more, so who really wins? Very quickly before we finish, key difference from a research perspective and for your understanding between concurrent training, hybrid training, and CrossFit.
Oh, and CrossFit.
I know this is not something we can quickly summarise, but if you could summarise the nuances for a future podcast.
Did you say competitive functional fitness? I don't know.
No, this isn't going to be used for marketing purposes, so we won't get sued.
Okay, go.
Or,
as you were,
option B, for Josh in the editing room, functional fitness at a competitive level. If we do get sued, we can go back, edit this, and make it that, and re-upload it. Thank you very much. Well played, Johnny. Nice. Anyway.
Cool. So use functional fitness.
Yeah. Or A or B. Yeah.
I don't know. The more and more I sort of investigate into it, I'm thinking that functional fitness is more within the hybrid realm. Because ultimately they want to get stronger and more cardiovascularly fit. Okay, that's similar to rugby, for example. But the methods that they're using to get stronger could actually end up being in their competition setting. Yeah. So hybrid training, in how we've described it, as in like want to get better at powerlifting and triathlon, like is a bit more controlled because we know what the measures are, and those are kind of like the sport setting we're setting for ourselves. But with functional fitness, those measures could be in the sporting context. It might not be, but if they're not, they probably help contribute to that competitive element. So I'd say like functional fitness is leaning on the side of hybrid performance, and that's probably why a lot of functional fitness trainers often call themselves hybrid trainers as well. Like
it's becoming more and more apparent that I think what I'm seeing from my perspective, looking at the way that functional fitness coaches are coaching for these competitions or coaching their competitive athletes, because I think it's useful to separate out the community in that sense, which often aren't competitive and just want to work out and have fun, from the competitive element, is it's actually becoming much more intelligent, the way that that's managed. And if you look at the programming now, it's based on the solid principles of strength and conditioning, whereas even 5 or 6 years ago it was based on randomizing stuff until people broke, and then
there's still a lot of randomization in boxes and things, though, isn't there? Yeah.
I think at the higher level, people are that little bit. I'm thinking of
there's some fantastic coaching companies, Red Pill and things.
Yeah, and who's the Invictus are doing some good things, and And actually, Invictus at a certain point reached out to find out a little bit more about hybrid programming as well. So they've got an ear to the ground in the sense of, okay, so where's the science or the application of intelligent programming leading us, and what can we take from this and take from that? So
the big question is
knowing
when to separate, isn't it? I think that's the last piece of the puzzle for probably every element of this continuum that we've been discussing today. Is where are the points at which the discipline in which you would like to support other disciplines needs to be separated to continue to progress at the rate at which you want it to progress.
Well, I mean, CrossFit, I've said it, you can just keep it as this is me from looking at it from an analytical perspective. You can still break down all the different elements of that. You can still break down the competitive requirement. You can't break down how the competition is going to pan out, because that's always randomized, isn't it? They turn up and then it's like, okay, it's this today, and oh bloody hell, we didn't expect to.
Oh, I haven't swam in months.
Was it the one? Now we're going to do a marathon on the row. I was like, bloody hell, that was a bit mental, because straight afterwards they're going to have to do ring dips and their pecs come off or whatever.
That did happen.
Exactly.
There was one.
I think it was something to muscle ups or something. They started 3 pecs got tore, and everybody was asking why.
I remember that.
But when you break down the requirements, which again, Phil, you know better than most around this table, is the principles of strength and conditioning. Essentially, you break down the requirements of the sport and then build back up and say, okay, so what are the specifics needed for the sport and for the individual taking part in that sport? It's relatively easy to do, because it all still sits in a continuum. And then you can take those parts of that continuum and put them back in. Where you've got things like barbell cycling and where you've got things that actually don't quite sit within, you can still look at the energy system requirement of that particular thing. And then you could break down, okay, if we want to develop the energy system in order to be able to get better at these things, that's one component of training. But then over and above that would be the skill-based stuff. And then you would put that in, as we've said in all 3 of these episodes, you would put that in as a priority thing. But the problem is within boxes and within larger group settings, your requirement for skill versus your requirement for skill, or your priority sessions are different to mine. And I think that's where it breaks in, because it has to be individualized. And for the most part, it's not, I think.
If your intention is steady progress rather than just the community aspect and enjoying fitness, to clarify, from a performance point of view, but in no way wanting to demonize people just going to boxes and enjoying them for what they are, because they're fantastic.
So from an OMNIA perspective, I think that what we're doing can inform a better outcome for CrossFit.
Agreed. Hence why we've had lots of successful.
It has, again, proven in the data somewhat, but it's an interesting conversation. If people would like to have that, please come to us. But
indeed. And I think we'll probably
mad bias, please.
we'll probably have a more in-depth conversation on the actual differences between how you piece together programming and the actual the systemic things and molecular things that are going on when it comes to actually training from that side of things. Because previous podcasts we spoke about how you want to separate strength training and endurance training and do that sensibly, but actually when you're then training CrossFit, you're blending those things together. So how does that work? So we'll come back to that. But that has been a difference between concurrent and hybrid training and other things. So
we'll have to get Phil back for sure.
3
episodes we've had,
and lots of exciting things.
What might need to be around 18.
Yes.
At least
18. Well, why did you choose 18?
It was a kind of a multiplication from 3, and I just stopped at 9.
Okay. 3 by 9 is not.
No, carry on.
It's 27.
Yeah, carry on.
Way off.
Carry on.
We're not editing this out. Johnny is a fool. Anyway, today we've summarized concurrent training, hybrid training, and that Johnny is a fool. So thank you again for Phil. Oh, no, this is embarrassing now.
Yeah, that was good.
Cut. Thank you again to Phil for joining us for 3 episodes. Do make sure to go and check out his Instagram and his podcast, which is The Progress Theory, easily found through Dr. Phil Price's Instagram account. Lots of exciting conversations of this ilk in there, and we will be getting Phil back. And you will have access to Phil on a more intimate basis, but not in a weird OnlyFans sort of way, through a new product going live soon that might be live at the point that I'm saying this. So whether I'm being cryptic or just inaccurate, time will tell. Anyway, thank you again for listening, and see you next time.
Thank you.